And I believe we are actually now live,
Nice.
which is cool. Welcome to the first broadcast of Chord Bank Live. We're here with Andres Amitai Wilson, who is it's hard to know what your intro should be because there's a lot of things. You are a Berklee graduate. You are a amazingly talented guitarist and performer.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Academic. You have many degrees from different places, including a doctorate. And what am I missing?
I think you pretty much got it. I'm a dad. That pretty much defines me more than anything else these days.
Devoted father. So this is the first time we've done this. This is Andres is very glad, very helpful to be here with us, and so he's going to be taking questions. Great. He's going to be taking questions. We have some people waiting. In fact, Maria is waiting for me to add her to the room, and I'll add her now. But
great.
Before we get her in, anything you want to say to the what must be millions of people watching us live on Facebook?
Oh yes, of course. I'm so glad to have you here. Anything's fair game. Do you want to ask about guitar, about gear, about learning guitar, about your process of learning? Anything you want to ask me.
All right. Well, here comes contestant number one.
Fantastic.
Maria, I don't know where she is from exactly. She's got her video off, which is totally fine. So Maria sent in a few questions. Before we get to that, I'm just going to go for a question that I had from email. And also, if you're watching live on Facebook, let me open up the page now so that I can see. If you're watching live on Facebook... Oh, I have to mute my own audio on Facebook. If you're watching live on Facebook, you can ask any questions on the live thing, and I'll do my best to get Andres to answer them. We lost Maria. Well, there she goes. One question I had on email, which I wonder if you have experience with, it concerns the A major chord.
Yeah.
So the question reads as follows, and then we can just kind of riff on it because I'm interested.
Sure.
Because you've taught a lot of private lessons. Oh, I have somebody. I wonder if this is Maria in here on the Facebook Live saying hi. But you've taught a lot of lessons. I wonder. The question here is about fitting your fingers in when you're playing the A chord. It says, "I'm learning the A chord and I can't fit I can't fit my fingers into between the frets." What do you tell your students when they're just starting their...
Yeah, that's a great question. Here, I'll try to angle my screen on just this chord here. So one of the things that I think is most challenging about the A chord is that people don't arch the fingers of their left hand enough. So you see this a lot, right? And then it feels like you can't fit your fingers because, you're draping your fingers across the strings rather than arching them. So what I would really recommend is to arch your fingers as much as possible, and that tends to give your fingers enough space. I have pretty big hands too, so it's not.
Can you angle yourself so we can see
Oh yeah, sure.
Underneath them, basically.
Yeah, sure. Is that better?
Yeah.
So there's that, and then another thing is what you do with your thumb. So you see a lot of people putting the thumb behind the neck, right? Right, like that, and that works pretty well just for reinforcing the strength of the left hand. I personally like to kind of wrap my thumb over the neck, and that also blocks the E string out. So if you're strumming rather than arpeggiating, I'm not getting that E sound, and if I do, it's like a blocked out sound rather than the sound of the chord itself. So that helps.
To be so careful with your strumming. That's the idea?
Yeah, exactly. And then in terms of fitting your fingers, if you're arching them, you should really have less trouble doing it. But sometimes it's a case of, and people run into this with bar chords as well, once they start doing bar chords, that it's like, can I fit my fingers into the fret? You can if you're arching your fingers properly. And a lot of that's just experimenting with the thumb and seeing where the best thumb placement for you is. I mean, there are some good rules of thumb, pun not intended, but that worked out quite well. Some people do it, again, over the fretboard. Some people do it right behind the neck, right behind the chord.
That's actually a good thing, and that's a question that's come up before. Is kind of in hand positioning, like, is there a reason to do one or the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that people sometimes encounter, so Jimi Hendrix would play a lot of these chords with his thumb over the fretboard, and I think that was to allow him to do little fills when he was inside the chord. Once you feel more facility with the chord and you can do them and move more quickly. But I don't think there's necessarily a reason. It's just a sound thing and a comfort thing.
Well, what about pressure? Like when you get a different amount of leverage when you have your thumb on the back of the neck.
True. Yeah. I mean, both ways are good. I find this a little awkward. I mean, it works. It makes a good sound. It helps you to arch your fingers. But it's a little awkward if you're switching pretty quickly between chords, because this just isn't something you do very often unless you're doing a bar chord. Right?
I gotcha. I wonder if maybe once you get more strength. Well, I have a question about something that I saw you do, actually, and this isn't on the list of questions that I have the people sent in, but I noticed that when you're fingering that A chord, you're using your second, third, and fourth fingers.
Yeah.
And people who've been playing a long time, they'll often, use what was comfortable, what's easy to change. Is it actually... One question that I have gotten in the past is, does it matter which fingers you use?
Oh, that's so true. Yeah, some people do it like this as well. That's a very good question, Chris. It doesn't matter. It's kind of what works for you. I think the first fingerings that you learn are often thought of as the easiest. The ones that fit the most comfortably under the fingers, and therefore, you should learn it that way. But here, I'll give you another example, right? So if you're doing an open E chord, that's the voicing most people do, or the fingering most people do. So you have your index finger on the first fret of the G, you have your ring finger on the second fret of the D, you have your middle finger on the second fret of the A, and you just strum the whole thing. When I started playing guitar, I started playing the E like this. And I still do most of the time. And it still sounds fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong. I play a lot of my bar chords like that. I can do it both ways now, but I actually learned it this way first. And then later I'm like, oh, that's not actually the right way of playing it, but it works fine for me.
You mean when you have your I'm sorry, I was misunderstanding what you actually were saying. You mean instead of you have them kind of going up in a line instead of up and down.
Exactly. Exactly. And it works fine for bar chords, right? Because this is the E shape, and we could move that over and make it a bar chord and make it an F bar chord, and it works very well.
Gotcha. That's actually a good segue because Maria, I see that she's not actually in our Zoom, but she commented on our Facebook live broadcast. Her question that she really wanted to answer, I have actually a bunch of questions from her, which is great. We should just go through them. But the last one she asked and the one she said she wanted to make sure we got to is about bar chords. So this is what she wrote. She said, bar chords, I'm just starting to use them. Are some chords only available by bar chord? I know chords are created in triads, but how do you know how to create those chords on the fretboard? Oh, well, there's actually a bunch here that's more than that, but let's just start with the first thing.
Yeah.
Are some chords only available via bar chord?
It's a really good question. I mean, there are so many different ways you can play almost any chord, and once you get more experience with the instrument, you see that. But yes, there are certain chords that the easiest way to play it, there's no open voicing for it, right? Like a G chord is an open chord, right? If you're doing an open G chord. But there are certain chords like, say, an F chord, or let's say B flat, right? You can't play a B flat in any way other than a bar chord when you're first learning. And there are certain chords like that in strange keys. They're normally like flats or sharps or things like that.
Why is that?
Because of the tuning of the guitar. So we have E, A, D, G, B, E. And so if we're doing the triads, as I think Maria asked, and it's great that you know that you build things in triads. Probably you play another instrument as well. That's great. There are certain triads you just can't build with those notes that have the combinations from the open strings. So the way that the guitar is tuned and set up, yes, they're only mostly flat and sharp keys because they don't contain any of these notes. So like B flat, right? The notes in a B flat are B flat, D, and F, right? And so we do have the D there, but that's the only note that's in the chord that we could play with an open string.
So it's all about, you have to like move those around, and then
Yeah.
how do you know that? So then this kind of ties into that, but she says, I know chords are created in triads, we already said.
Yeah.
But how do you know how to create those chords on the fretboard? How do you know which notes to press, or what? If it's a root 5 or root 6 chord, which fret number to bar? Do you just have to memorize these things, or is there a way to figure that out? So it looks like she's done some learning on her own, or had a teacher, and kind of has a lot of the pieces.
Yeah. One thing I'll just mention, Chris, I don't know if you're hearing, we're picking up some radio frequency or something.
Oh, yeah, heard. It's not me. I don't think.
I don't know if it's me either.
I would say don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it, okay.
Yeah, just keep going. It's fine.
Sounds like it's
live.
In Hebrew or
it's
something.
Live radio.
Yeah, no, it's very cool.
This is.
So what I would say for the bar chord piece is, learn the bar chords for major and minor forms, right? And then learn the names of the notes across the fretboard, and then you can just use those shapes. And I would say do that for, all the chords you learn as you learn. Yeah,
Can
sure.
you give a specific example of that? Like, and Maria,
yeah, sure.
I'm watching the Facebook, the comments. So if you're in there and you have questions or you want to clarify, or you're happy, like right, let us know. But
Great.
Can you make that a specific example?
Sure, yeah.
So specific chord.
Let's take A, right? Let's take the A open chord that we were just talking about. Now when we make a bar chord that starts on the A string, right? A string root. So we have the A string, we play it open, that's an A chord. If we were going to do an A string bar chord, we call it a bar chord because we're essentially taking that shape and moving it over. So for example, the note after A in the musical alphabet would be A sharp or B flat, because those are the same. They're called enharmonic, right? A sharp and B flat are the same thing. They just have different names. So we could take this whole shape and shift it over with a bar chord, and now all of a sudden we have a B flat. Right? So we went from A to B flat. And the reason why we call it B flat, the shape is the same, but because the root note is B flat. Now, we can take that again. If I wanted to play B, right? B would be next in the musical alphabet because we have A sharp / B flat. Up to B, we move it to the second fret. And then if we wanted to play C, even though we have a C open chord, maybe you're playing like a, alternative rock song or something and you want that bar chord sound. We have a C already, right?
Can I ask a question there?
Please,
kind of ties into her thing. So some of the words that she used in there was root 5 and root 6. Can you talk about how that ties into what you're doing there? So that's a root 5 chord, right? And why is that called a root 5 chord? Yeah, so I'm actually playing more than just a root 5. I'm playing the bar chord, which has the triad. It's just voiced in a way that works for the guitar. Root 5, I'm not sure if Maria means a power chord, which is just the root in the 5th. Right, then we don't have the sound of the 3rd in there. So this is with the 3rd. Oh! I think what she probably means is a chord rooted on the 5th string, maybe. Okay, that makes sense. So with a root on the 5th string, yeah, great. And then root 6. I get what you're saying. Thank you, Chris. It might just be a different pedagogy of how to call it. Yeah. So great. I think. Yeah, I would call them A string root, and maybe that's root 5 because it gets it started on the A string. And I actually think that's helpful to refer to it as the name of the string because then it orients you a little bit more, right? Gotcha.
So if you know that it's an A string root, you're also keeping in the back of your mind that every time I play this open, I'm playing an A, right? And every time, what's after an A? B flat, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, etc.
Maybe it'd be good to then transition and talk about kind of the other very, very common flavor of major bar chords, which is that are rooted on that E string. Can you talk about those and how those are related?
So remember on the A string, we're basically taking the A shape and moving it over, and the bar is taking the place of what would be played like here, right? For the E string bar chords, you're basically taking the E shape. And what you're doing is rather than, you're moving that E shape, but because we need something to take the place of the open strings, we have the bar. So this is E. Next in the musical alphabet after E, we have F. That's an F bar chord. Next in the musical alphabet is an F sharp. Next we have a G. So those are just two options, right? G sharp, A sharp, B. And I think it's really useful to learn the notes on the fretboard. You can even start with the E and the A string. Learning the notes on the fretboard really opened up my world as a guitar player. Because
when was that? Do you remember? Like how long had you been playing before you kind of went through that exercise?
I think for me it was actually I'd learned all my chords, and I just kind of wanted to get a better sense of like if I wanted to play a song and I found not tabs but like a chord chart somewhere, how would I know if something was like, you know, G sharp? So I would have to like count my way across the fretboard to know. Or I often found myself doing this. Let's say you're doing two bar chords. So when I was first playing, I might learn like, so let's say there's a song that goes G sharp, C sharp, right? So I would find myself doing this. And it sounds pretty good.
That reminds me of like a Cars song, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, and you can do that for an effect, but it's also making so much more work for yourself because I'm sliding up 5 frets. And I thought to myself, there has to be an easier way of doing this. And there is, but I have to switch between 2 bar chords because there's a C sharp right under there. So rather than doing this, I could do this. And it's the same exact chords, right? It's just playing it in a more logical place, so I don't have to do as much work. If I want the sound of that, you know, string sliding, right? Which,
sure.
Then I can always do that other option. But that was probably, I would say, like maybe a year or 2 into learning the guitar, where I wanted to play songs more easily.
Do you remember? I have 2 questions for you. One is, how did you do it? Like, do you remember how you, as however old you were, memorize the fretboard? And then the second question is like, when you're working with students now, what do you tell them to do, basically? How do you teach them to do that?
There are 2 ways of going about it. So I think I took, I think I started working, no, I probably wasn't working with a teacher at that point, but what I decided to do was to learn all the names of the notes on the E and the A strings from the open to the 12th fret. And of course I took it to the 12th fret because after the 12th fret they all repeat, right? So E is the open string, 6th string open, and then you play the 12th fret and it's E an octave higher. So I didn't have to learn all this stuff because I knew it just repeated. So I think I did it by rote and just like I had some sort of a diagram that had E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A, etc. and memorized it. But then a friend of mine told me, well, if you know the musical alphabet, you don't really need to memorize. You can just kind of figure it out on the spot. And if you do it enough times, it becomes like second nature. So rather than saying, you know, looking at a chart for a week, I could just say E, F, what between F and G, there's another note, F sharp, G. And if I do that enough through like trial and error and playing, I just sort of got it.
I got you. And is that what you tell your students to do now?
I actually have them study the chart.
Okay.
But some students who come from another instrument and know the musical alphabet can just kind of do the work on the spot. And then I often give people exercises where I'll say, you know, more like I'd say, you know, intermediate students who like know their basic chords and know their basic scales, but really fretboard awareness is something they're still struggling with. So sometimes as a warm-up, I'll say, play 4 different G's on your guitar, right? And they'll do something like, and then I'll say, play 5 different G's, right? And they're like, right? And then do it with some more obscure notes like A flat, until it becomes like second nature.
That's cool. We may as well move and keep going since that was we could keep going on bar chords. Maria, I'm going to move on to another one of your questions, but if you have any, if we didn't quite answer anything, or is there anything that you want Andres to talk about, let us know in the comments and I will ask it to him. Whoa, I'm getting a lot of emojis. I don't know where they're coming from. It's the future. So this is like a more of probably like a practical question rather than theory. Um, she wants to know how often you should change your strings, and how do you know which kind of strings to buy?
That's great. That's a really good question. So it depends on whether you're playing acoustic or electric. So there's also the ideal and the real. So pre what's been going on, I was a gigging musician. I played a lot, and if I was playing all the time, when I was so busy, that was actually when I needed to change my strings the most, when you had the least time to do it. I would say if you play 3 hours a week or so, you should probably change your strings every month, for an electric guitar. For an acoustic guitar, depending on the kind of strings you have, they might have more longevity. So there are certain brands that, like, the focus of their strings is that they last for a long time, because it's a pain in the neck to change your strings.
Like the coated strings?
The coated strings. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say brands here.
Yeah, man. Go for it.
Okay, great. So, people talk about like Elixir strings for that, that are coated. I personally, I don't want to throw shade on Elixir. They're great, but it's just not my thing sound-wise. So I prefer to just change my strings more often. And
Gotcha.
But I'm also not picky about the kind of string that I use. I just want them to be kind of fresh. And a lot of people like that sound of fresh strings because,
Gotcha.
that's when you're going to have the most dynamism out of the strings. They're going to give you the most impact, and they'll respond to what you're playing. One thing that I would say is, if you're changing your strings, it's important to know what gauge string was on your guitar before you change your strings. Okay, and this is super important. It just helps you to make sure you conserve your guitars a little bit, because let's say that you have light gauge strings. So like, on an acoustic, let's say 11 gauge strings, right? And then you try to replace them with medium gauge strings, not even heavy gauge strings, but medium gauge strings. It's going to put a lot of added pressure on the neck of your guitar, and it might actually do some damage to your guitar. So it's important that, when you change your strings, you have a decent understanding of the gauge, right?
And gauges, that's thickness, right?
That's thickness, exactly. Because they come in
gauge...
all different... Sorry, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
Oh, no, you go.
I was just going to say that they come in all different gauges. And as you get more adept at the guitar, you choose the gauge for the kind of music you like to play and the kind of effect you want to get. I'd say typically most electric guitar strings are 9 is going to be, the high E is going to be 9, gauge 9, right? And the low E is going to be a 42. And if you buy just a random guitar at a store, generally that's going to be that. If you go up to the next level in terms of size and you get like 10 on the high string, right, it's not going to do so much damage to your guitar. I mean, you'll be fine, and that's a little difference. But let's say that if you do the heaviest gauge on your guitar, and it's an electric guitar, that could put a lot of pressure on the neck. For an acoustic guitar, a medium gauge tends to be like, the standard. So, I would say buy a medium gauge if you have any doubt as to the gauge of your strings. When you need to replace your strings, just buy medium and you should be in good shape. And you could always take your guitar, to a person who really knows what they're doing. Either, if you have a teacher at home, or if you, have your local guitar shop, they can kind of figure it out. I would say it's better to do that than to warp the neck of your guitars. Because when I was a beginner, I actually had a few guitars that I was like, I'm getting better and I want to play on thicker gauge strings because that's what Stevie Ray Vaughan did, and I want to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan, right? Mm-hmm. And I tried to change the strings and did these very heavy strings, and it was to the detriment of my instrument. And then I had to put some money into making the neck not warped and all that kind of thing. So just be careful.
I'm gonna throw you, because you are a man of education. Talk to me about although I think this is outside of your specialty, the physics of gauge and tone Like it has to do with the density of the string, right? And that is what affects the.
Oh.
And then there's tension involved in it. And do you know?
Oh no, I'm so right brain, Chris. You're the left brain here. You gotta help me. That's a bad question for me.
Let me flip it and make it practical.
Thank you.
So why would you use lighter gauge or heavier gauge strings? Like one of them is easier to play. One of them, what are the differences between lighter gauge or heavier gauge?
Okay, great. So lighter gauge strings are easier to play. If you're into playing like really virtuosically on an electric guitar and you have light gauge strings, it allows you to move faster along the fretboard. If you're playing, and also a virtuosic style, but like a sort of blues virtuosic style in electric guitar, the thicker gauge strings have a little bit more resonance. So like Jimi Hendrix and Stevie Ray Vaughan and all those guys who played blues on a Stratocaster, they used like really thick gauge strings and to get that sound. So
does that mean it would sustain longer with the heavier gauge strings?
I think so. I mean, I kind of split the difference. I use these strings that are called hybrid slinky. So the strings on the bottom are like a medium gauge, and the strings on the top are heavy gauge.
Gotcha.
Yeah, or excuse me, the strings on the bottom are heavy gauge, strings on the top. I mean, from where the guitar is facing you. So these strings are thin, and these strings are thick on my electric.
The Ernie Ball brand?
Exactly. But now they have different types of slinkies. So they have, super slinky is the one that most people have, and then there's hybrid slinky, which is what I use.
I got you. Okay. I'm going to do one more Maria question, and then my sister is trolling me in the comments. I have a question. So Maria asked a question in the comments. Is learning scales important, and which scales? There are so many. Andres actually did one of the first things we did together was a really awesome pentatonic scale lesson in like an actual studio and whatever. But talk to me about this. Like, what do you do with your students when you're teaching? When do you start them on scales? Is it right away? Is it do you teach them that they are playing scales, or do you teach them just melodic lines? Like, maybe talk a little bit about that.
Okay, that's a good question. I think everybody should know, all guitar players should know the major scale. I was supposed to turn that off. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, we all know it's 7:30.
The ghost in my machine here.
Yeah, man.
So I tell all of my students to learn the major, minor, and pentatonic scales because, as to Maria's earlier question about like sort of knowing the fretboard and knowing how to play bar chords in different places, the scales help you to know that. Like, not just to mindlessly play scales, but if I played a C major scale in open position, right? I can play it mindlessly, or I can like really pay attention to the notes. So I could say C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? And then I know those notes on the fretboard, and I'll always know those notes, and it helps me. If I try to play that scale in a movable position, all the notes are going to be the same, but I'm not using open strings, so I'll see my way around the fretboard. Let's say I do it here. Right? That's the do, re, mi, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do. So now I know two different ways that I can play this. And so it opens up my awareness of the fretboard, and that's why it's good. I don't think you should mindlessly play scales. And what I tell my students is, you learn these things to know the fretboard. But then what I do with my students is it's dependent on what they want to learn. So in certain styles of music, I don't know if it's really necessary to learn scales. I mean, I know that's probably a scandalous thing to say. And I also think scales can be a crutch if you practice them too much. So as you get really adept at playing scales, they can help you to know the fretboard, but they can also be to the detriment of your musicality. So I know, having grown up playing a lot of, virtuosic kind of heavy metal stuff, I could play scales really fast, but I wasn't necessarily making music. And sometimes knowing scales can actually hinder that. But as you're learning, I think it's a great way of knowing the fretboard and understanding where things are on your guitar. So definitely, if you want to understand your instrument, you want to figure out like a little bit of theory and understand the song that you hear on the radio to be able to pick it out on your own, knowing major and minor scales at least would be very useful for that.
Kind of on that, something you said made me think of kind of an extension of that. With your students, like when you are guiding them, do you choose? So one of Maria is the all-star of this Chord Bank live session with all of her questions.
Yeah, Maria, good work.
Flows right into it. One of her questions was, how do I find new songs to practice? And I kind of have a twist on that, which is like, as you're working with students, and you were talking about making sure that like the things they're learning are musical, like how do you guide them to certain songs because they feature certain certain scales or modes or different skills that they need to learn? Like how do you choose? I guess you probably know where I'm trying to go. Like, talk a little bit about that.
I'm kind of about the choose your own adventure, and that's why I think like Chord Bank's great because it's so like self-directed in that way. Like you can kind of study the things that you want to learn on the instrument.
And infomercial over.
Yeah. No. Okay. Great. But truly so. What I would say with my students is once they tell me about like what they want to learn, I will say like, check this song out. And then if there's some sort of aspect of that song that reflects a scale or some sort of theory that they need to know, then I'll teach them that thing. But I don't like overwhelm them with it if it's not something they want to do. I used to do that. I used to say, you have to learn your G major scale in third position. Then you have to do it in open position. And I had a lot of very angry students. That's not true. Now, no one was really angry, but I could tell that like we were doing the fun, juicy stuff. And then it's like, oh, let's do the scales. Now, there's one other thing about scales that I'll just mention to Maria, that they're good for developing technique, and it's always good to be able to know your way around your instrument, no matter what kind of style you're playing, as a warm-up. So I often do scales with students as a warm-up as well. If people are interested in a certain sound and that sound reflects the scale, then I'll always tell people to play a scale. A lot of people like to play blues when they first start playing, a lot of beginners. The first thing I learned on guitar was... And I was like, wow, and that also has this pentatonic sound, right? Right, that kind of sound. And so in order to play the blues properly, I needed to learn the pentatonic scale. So first I learned the scale, and then I learned how to give it its own flavor. Right? But if someone didn't want to learn how to play blues necessarily, then is it really necessary for them to learn that? It's a good question. It depends on what you want to learn.
Are there go-to songs that you kind of push people towards if they kind of come into the lesson, they're just like, oh, I just like everything? Like, are there go-to songs that you've found are useful to teach different aspects of learning?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have had students who were not adult students generally, but like kid students who were, maybe they were interested in the guitar vaguely, but they didn't really know what that entailed, or their parents pushed them and they were kind of interested and they didn't really listen to music. So in that case, yes, because I see my job as like, educating them on, what they should do. So one of the things that I always teach all my beginners is Knocking on Heaven's Door, the Bob Dylan song, because it uses all the open chords, right? G, D, A minor, G, D, C. And in the case of a song like that, then I would say, and while you're learning this, you might want to learn the G major scale, because that's the scale that outlines this harmonic progression, this chord progression. And then we might talk about technique and how to play it with alternate picking with the right hand and all that kind of stuff. That's with like absolute beginners, people who are just working through open chords. With bar chords, I mean, already we're getting into a direction where it's like a choose your adventure thing. But I think at one time, the big chord progression that everyone learned, I know my dad, who's a guitarist, who's a baby boomer, he learned Walk, Don't Run, right? That was something everyone learned at one time. So I used to teach that progression to people who knew the song, but rarely do people know that song anymore.
that's a good kind of segue to one question is like, how do you vary your teaching style when you're dealing with people from different generations? Basically,
Yeah.
is it mostly the musical references, or does the fact that people grew up listening to different stuff mean that they want and need different guitarists, like technique? Like, talk a little bit about that. When you're, I mean, I assume you've had people of all different ages.
I have. Yeah, my oldest students have been in their 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a few students now who are not even 10 years old. So, yeah. So, I mean, the youngest student I've ever taught was 4, but that was like 10 years ago. So now he's 14. But yeah, I mean, what I find is that, if you're trying to teach like somebody nowadays, walk, don't run, not just would they not necessarily like it, but they wouldn't even get the reference or the meaning to it. So I tend to cater my teaching to what a student likes. And it's cool in a way for me because I listen to everything. I listen to everything from, like Ariana Grande's album that just dropped a couple weeks ago to Django Reinhardt, who was the great gypsy jazz guitarist in the 1920s. It just really all depends on what my students want to learn. And then I have to learn that stuff. And some of it I love and some of it I don't, but at least I'm familiar with it. And that's my approach to students. But I definitely don't force feed my students anything anymore. Although I think as a younger teacher, I definitely did. I was like, this is what I like, and you're going to learn how to play this.
That's kind of a nice thing, though, if you're constantly being forced to learn, and not only to listen to, but to actually like learn how to play and then teach, which is a whole nother level in the pyramid. That stuff. There's that's a good. My sister will kill me if I don't ask the question that she put in the comments, which is what is the best age for kids to start playing? So you said you had kids as young as 4, which is terrifying to me because I have a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And
as do I.
He has not yet mastered the guitar. But what
does he play?
Well, we have one of those little. It's funny. I just did a podcast where I talked about this brand, so it's going to seem like I'm really pushing them. But
yeah,
we have a little Loog, which is like a 3-string guitar, and it's tuned the same as a guitar. It's pretty cool. And he's done a little bit of that, but I wouldn't call him virtuosic just yet. He has a very good ear, though.
That's great.
But but somewhere between the age of 4 and 70, where would you kind of like feel like kids have the dexterity, the concentration, the desire, like to really benefit from having lessons?
I've had students who, not to brag, but I've had students who made it to Berklee, and I worked with them for several years. And I would say those students started when they were 11, 12. That's kind of like, I also feel like that's the age where people actually start really listening to music seriously, and that matters, that there's like skin in the game. I think it depends on when kids like music. That's what I would say. If your kid likes music and is 4, then maybe that's the right time. You can buy guitars that are not full size, so that's great. And like you mentioned with your son, you have this guitar with Loog, it's called. I've never heard of that. That's very cool.
It's cool. I'll send you a link after.
Yeah, please do.
When this goes out on the things, I'll put a little link in there.
Cool.
But they're really rad, and they look cool, and they do all sorts of stuff. I want to flip the question and go back to, so that's kind of an age the kids start playing. One question that I get is a lot of people. I have a lot of people that email me. They're in their 50s, 60s. They always wanted to play, and they're just picking it up now, or they played a little bit before, and they're like, the cliche question is, am I too old to play the guitar? But I want to flip it and say more just like, because obviously that's like a straw man question, right?
Yeah.
I want to flip it and say, what are some things that you have found when working with people that are real adults learning guitar in their 50s, 60s, and I guess your 70-year-old people, like what tends to work for them differently than people who are younger who are starting? What's easy? What comes more naturally to them? What's harder for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the what's easier for them is understanding the theoretical concepts. Older people just kind of get it. because they've dealt with like abstract ideas and like music. It's pretty practical, but I guess, you know, if you're 11 or 12, you're like, huh? And especially if you're not coming from this with another instrument, like theory can be a bit overwhelming and I guess a little disheartening once you encounter it for the first time. Like, oh, I have to learn all this stuff. But I would say that, you know, older people get that better. Older people come with a desire to learn, and they've always wanted to learn an instrument, and therefore the passion is there. One of the biggest challenges that I actually find with older people is they get frustrated a bit more easily, and because of that, they don't practice. And they say, like, I'm too old to do this, which is never true. It's never, ever, 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 ever true. Because it's just muscle memory, right? So whether you're, you know, 10 or 70, you just got to go through the motions. You can still do it. Like if you need to play an A minor and you're 4, or you need to play an A minor and you're 70, it's the same. You just got to make sure to arch those fingers. And you can still do it. And it doesn't have to be an hour a day. It can really be 5 minutes of focused practice every day. And by the end of the week, you'll know your chords, you know, and be able to play them well. So that's one major thing that I would say to older people, just not to get discouraged about it, that it's like anything else and it requires practice. Yeah.
I wonder if, I remember every time, it seems like every time I have to learn something new, like totally start from scratch, like learn something completely new. As a grown up, like it's kind of like, you don't have to, when you're a kid, you're pretty used to not being able to do stuff and then having to learn how to do it. I feel like maybe as an adult, like there's this part of us that like doing something that's totally foreign. Like often most of the stuff we're doing as adults is like incremental new stuff.
Yeah.
But like when you try to, you know, play the guitar or learn how to play the drums or try to play the clarinet, God forbid, like that's like totally new. Well, I don't know. Have you ever heard somebody who's learning how to play the clarinet? It's not.
I haven't had that pleasure, Chris. No, sorry.
I would skip it.
I love the sound of someone who can actually play the clarinet. The clarinet sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful instrument. I wish I could play it. Maybe I'll pick it up. I'm not too old.
Hey man, put down that guitar. Let me switch to another question from email. We had one from Teresa that was about how to use an electronic tuner, but I neglected to bring one here, and Andres can't find his, so we're not going to answer that question.
Well, can I mention like apps, which are great electronic tuners?
Let's just do it on a future one.
Okay,
when we
sounds good.
And then we can do apps and the real ones and whatever.
Okay.
I have one from Faustine. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It could be Faustina. But she says she's learned quite a number of chords already, and she has a few questions. One is, my problem is strumming. I would like to know how to strum well. Do I have a chance to learn this in a live lesson? So nothing super specific, but how do you approach rhythm when you're teaching it with your students? Like where do you start?
Yeah. So that's one thing that we do focus on a lot, just counting and understanding the difference between quarter notes and eighth notes. I think at the basic level of strumming, that's really what you need to know. Just the difference between, you know, you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Those are quarter notes. 3, 4, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So first you understand that rhythm, and if there's a song you want to strum, it's important to be able to clap the rhythm first and understand that. And then understanding what the function of the right hand is. And of course, you know, depending on which style or what song you're playing, it's going to be different. But as a general rule, if you're doing eighth notes, the strumming pattern would be down, up, 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 down, up. And if you can do that consistently, right, learning how to strum is often a case of removing one of those down ups. And just understanding where it falls in the rhythm. Another thing
is the speed you. Oh, I'm sorry. You go ahead and make that point, and then I had.
Well, I was just going to say another thing that people sometimes encounter as a technical issue with the right hand is when you're strumming, what size pick to use. So like I use a pretty thick pick most of the time, so I can do single note lines and make it clean. But if I'm strumming in more of a folky kind of vibe, I use my fingers. And just kind of, And I know a lot of people just use thinner picks, and then they can do that same pattern, but with a pick, right? So it could be your pick size that can, paying attention to the size of your pick could be useful. It could be looking at whether you do it with your fingers, or it could just be knowing that, that eighth note rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1.
Is that the speed you would usually go at with a beginner in your lessons? Like about that speed?
You mean of the eighth note pattern?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would use a metronome and start it pretty slowly.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think just because of what we're doing now, I probably did it in my intuitive kind of way.
No. That wasn't to say that it sounded fast to me. It was just a genuine question.
I wonder where that was. That's 87 there. So that's a pretty slow tempo, but because it's an eighth note feel, that's probably, it felt a little faster. But I don't know if I would do it that fast. I would probably do it according to the song that we were learning, Chris.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that's a really good question. It makes me a little self-aware of doing things that. No, it's good. It's good.
The actual, and then one thing I noticed you were doing is muting all the strings when you're working. Is that something that you generally do with your student? Is like separating the right and left, like when you're doing that strumming, you're working on your right hand, making that in time, doing that.
Yeah.
Do you usually mute all the strings when you're doing that at first? What's the transition like moving to doing that with closed strings to moving? Do you make sure they know the chords they're changing through really well? Like, how do you focus on like choosing which hand you're working on?
That's great. I think it depends on how complicated the song is. Going back to "Knocking on Heaven's Door," easy song, right? If you want to figure out how you strum it, I probably wouldn't. Once the left hand was down, I probably wouldn't even worry about that so much.
Sure. And
just have them kind of figure out how they want to do it on this side. Of course, with "Knocking on Heaven's Door," it's mostly arpeggiated. So that's probably a bad example, but yeah, I mean, it really depends on the song that they're doing, how percussive or how syncopated it is, how much is required of the right hand. If it's just strumming eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then I might say first do it without the chord, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and add the chords. And then just to get them to strum that consistent eighth note. Now, if you're actually performing that, it gets a little boring, right? But if you're just trying to get it down and feel like you're in the pocket with the rhythm, then there's nothing wrong with just strumming those eighth notes to every song. You don't have to nail the strumming pattern.
How long does that take people usually to go from kind of just like they're like learning their shapes, placing their fingers on the strings, to the point when they can actually like play in rhythm through the changes?
Depends on the song. Depends on how much they practice. I mean, again, just going back to my default of "Knocking on Heaven's Door," which is the first song that I teach people. If a person practices like 5 or 10 minutes a day for 2 weeks, they can know that really well, I think. Nice. I mean, the strumming pattern is always the hardest, and that's what people freak out about. But I would say this is not, something that all guitar teachers would necessarily agree with. But I think we worry too much about the strumming pattern. I think like it's more important to be in time and be playing the right chords, and eventually you'll get the strumming pattern in more of an intuitive way. And if that doesn't work for you, and there is a more like analytical way where we can look at the beats and look at downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke, but that tends to create a little bit of neurosis in students I've worked with. So I'm perfectly happy with people doing just, even 8 there, I'm doing a quarter note. 1, 2, 3, 4, without the upstroke, right? So.
It's like Schrodinger's strum pattern.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. We are wrapping up here. We have 9 minutes left in our live Zoom. So if you are watching and have questions you want to make sure we get to, Maria had one follow-up that she said, what about making strumming more interesting for intermediate students, slapping, muting, etc.? What do you think about that? Like, to what extent do you, like if somebody comes in with a YouTube video of like a very virtuosic performance that's got like a lot of tapping or strumming or like
Yeah.
stuff, like what do you basically take them towards? Like what I take from that question is like things that may be punching above their weight a little bit.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
How do you take something that somebody brings in that might be like months away from them and scale it back, or is that a problem that you have often?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, often, like, especially with like these more virtuosic acoustic players, like I'll just confess, I'm much more of an electric player. So like, you know, that sort of virtuosic acoustic playing with all the slapping and the tapping and all that stuff, I don't really do that. On the more virtuosic, you know, for the more virtuosic stuff, I'm much more comfortable at an electric. But, you know, what I would do is like take one of those techniques and teach a student it and say like, how might you incorporate this in your playing? Like a lot of R&B stuff nowadays are like neo soul will use the, right, that kind of slap with the thumb. So you might do like a chord progression like. Now I'm using seventh chords. Right, and there I'm just incorporating this one little slap, but that might be something that they can bring into their own playing, and that's something that's that you can incorporate even in like an upper beginner, early intermediate level, and it still sounds good and adds a little like a little sauce to your playing. If I just did it without the slap, it wouldn't sound quite as rhythmic. And there are other things that you can do, like doing a combination of the slap and the bass drum. Right? So I might teach someone something like that. Again, that's kind of outside of my wheelhouse, the real percussive stuff. But like there's always something that I can, you know, get out and extract from something someone's giving me, and then they can incorporate that into their playing and make it sound good and add a little more sophistication to their strumming than just the standard.
It's awesome when there's something that's like so bolt on that it's like it kind of goes with the skills that somebody already has, like rather than something that is like a separate thing, which is also valuable. Obviously, like there's plenty of separate things.
Yeah, definitely.
We probably have time for like one more genre, and I want to make sure I pick one that's good. Which I probably should have picked already, but there you go. Okay, here's a good one. This one came in on email. Any advice on practicing changing between chords? So how somebody, probably a beginner, knows a few chords, but is having a hard time making changes in rhythm.
Changing in rhythm or changing between chords? Maybe I misunderstood the question.
Inferred rhythm. The entirety of the question is any advice on practicing changing between chords. So I think we can interpret that however we want.
Yeah, I think that the way I understand it is changing between two different chords. So let's take two basic open chords, right? So what I would do is I would take the metronome. I'll start it at like a pretty low tempo. So 80. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I might start by doing one chord as a whole note and then following with the second chord as a whole note. So I might do something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you're a beginner player, switching between those two chords might be more challenging. And a lot of times people think I need to hold it for the whole 4 beats when I'm playing it. But what I would tell a student to do, just to get it under your fingers, is to use those extra beats to move your fingers in time. So what that means is you're not really playing a whole note. You're really not playing a chord for a whole 4 beats. You're not going like this, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead, you're doing this, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you're using the time in between where it should be a whole note to change your fingers, but stay in time, right? So you're moving closer to playing an actual song, an actual progression. And then once you feel more comfortable with that, you can try to speed up the tempo, and you can try to make it a whole note, actually make it a whole note, right? That's the goal, and keeping it in time. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And then if you have a song that has, let's say, 4 chords, you just add those chords into that pattern until you can do it flawlessly.
Nice. We just had somebody enter the waiting room, but I think it's too late for that, man. I'm really sorry, Terry. There's people from all over the world that were on the list to come in, so there might be like a time change difference, but whatever. But I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for being here. I want to make sure
this was
before
fun.
we leave that you can talk about what's going on with you, if people like you. I know you were saying you weren't you were pretty full with lessons. Not really looking for new students, but
but I mean, if somebody's interested in studying with me, I'm happy to talk to them, definitely, and maybe we can figure something out. I have a few students, and I have a full-time gig, and I hopefully, when all this is over, I'll be playing a lot again. So I'm not actively seeking students, but if you're really interested in learning something with me, I'm happy to open the conversational door.
And people find you the best way, you were saying, is on Instagram, yeah?
Yeah, that would be great. Andres A. Wilson on Instagram. And I'm also, I have a YouTube channel. I sometimes post a lot of like R&B clips and lessons on like hip hop and R&B songs, and the occasional kind of shred clip.
Nice.
And I used to post like gig excerpts as well. So I was going through like this throwback phase where I was playing a lot of like 90s and early 2000s R&B and teaching the lessons to those tunes that like had cool guitar parts, but there were no tutorials on YouTube. So I got some like Jay-Z stuff up there and Eminem and all that kind of stuff. So
that's awesome. Nice. Well, I'll definitely put a link to that in the recording of this that goes out. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And I think we're going to try to do this pretty regularly. I don't know exactly when the next one will be, but if you had a question that we didn't answer, there are a few in the comments that we didn't get to. Or Terry W., I'm very sorry you didn't make it in.
Sorry, Terry.
If you want to sign up to know when the next one is, you can go to the ChordBank site. I think the link is chordbank.com. I should have had this.
It's 8 o'clock.
Well, it's 8 o'clock. chordbank.com/zoom/lessons. Does that do it? Nope, that's not it.
That's not it.
Sorry, one moment. I mean, it doesn't really matter. If you go to, next time we'll have this also.
Should I type it in the chat? I think I found your
it's the other way
email.
around. It's the other way around. It's chordbank.com/lessons/Zoom. So if you're watching and you want to actually be in the Zoom next time, go there, sign up, and we'll send out a note before we do this again. Oh, wow, look at that. Andres just sent it out in chat form, but awesome. So wrapping up, thank you so much for being here. We'll do this again.
Sounds good. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Thanks, Chris. This was fun.
Yeah? Okay, bye.
Bye.